The first thing I smelled was vanilla. The second was bourbon on my father's breath. Then, his hand came down against the wedding cake, scooping up the slice the coordinator had just set aside for Daniel and me. "You ungrateful brat." Cold frosting struck my cheek before I fully understood what he was doing. For 1 second, the reception disappeared behind white buttercream, sugar, and the stunned silence of nearly 100 people. Dad stood inches from me. "Your sister owes $80,000. Pay it off." I wiped frosting from my eyelashes with the back of my hand. "No." His expression changed. "Then 20,000. By Monday, I'll handle the rest." That was the first thing that didn't make sense. If he could handle the rest, why was he willing to destroy my wedding over the first 20? I had spent 13 years in hospital procurement, learning one rule that had saved employers millions of dollars and irritated my father for most of my adult life. Never accept the summary when you can verify the source. The next morning, my sister sent me a text. "Dad said you changed your mind about the first 20. Thank you." I hadn't changed my mind. And by breakfast, the cake was no longer the part of my wedding that frightened me most. Dad had waited until Daniel and I were standing beside the cake table. That mattered. There were speeches happening on the other side of the ballroom, music low enough for conversation, and enough people lingering near dessert to turn anything louder than a whisper into an audience. My younger sister, Megan, stood beside Mom, with both hands wrapped around a champagne glass. Dad stepped between me and the photographer. "We need to settle this now." The phrase made my shoulders tighten before I knew why. There was always something to settle with my father. A medical copay. Property tax. A repair bill. Megan's rent 6 years ago. Megan's business insurance 3 years later. Mom's dental work. A plumbing emergency. A car that supposedly could not wait until Friday. At 39, I was apparently still the daughter expected to hear the word emergency and reach for her banking app. "Not tonight," I said. His jaw hardened. "Megan's in trouble." Megan looked down. That was the first time I understood he was talking about money. "How much trouble?" Dad didn't lower his voice. 80,000. For a second, I thought I had misheard him over the music. "What?" "Her business debt, suppliers, credit, whatever you want to call it." He flicked his fingers as if the labels were beneath him. "She needs to get it cleaned up." I looked at Megan. She didn't meet my eyes. My stomach dropped, but not because I was calculating whether I could afford $80,000. I was calculating how many conversations must have happened before that moment without me. "You want me to pay $80,000 of Megan's business debt?" Dad's eyes sharpened. "You make good money." There it was. Not, "Can you help?" Not, "Would you consider it?" Just the fact of my salary presented as evidence that somebody else had a claim on it. I was a senior procurement manager for a hospital system in Columbus. I managed contracts worth more than my parents' house. That meant I was comfortable. It did not mean I kept $80,000 in a drawer for relatives who overexpanded their boutiques. "No." Megan finally looked at me. Dad stared as though I had used a language he didn't recognize. "Excuse me?" I said no. "You haven't even heard the situation. You just told me she owes $80,000. She has a supplier deadline." "What deadline?" "Monday." It was Saturday night. My wedding night. Dad leaned closer. "She needs the first 20 by Monday. You put up 20, I'll handle the rest." Something in me went still. Not calm. Work calm. The kind that arrived when a vendor tried to bury a bad term on page 43 and hoped I would be too tired to notice. "If you can handle 60,000, I asked, "why do you need my 20? His mouth tightened. "Don't start doing this." "Doing what?" "Turning everything into an audit." Behind him, Mom murmured, "Claire, please. This isn't the place." I almost laughed. He had brought an $80,000 bailout request to my cake table, but apparently, I was the one who needed to remember where we were. Dad pointed toward Megan. "Your sister could lose everything." Megan whispered, "Dad." He ignored her. "You've always been the one who could manage. After everything this family has carried for you, you can carry her once." For a moment, the room tilted in a way that had nothing to do with champagne. Carried me? At 27, after my first major promotion, Dad had called because he and Mom were short on a property tax installment. I had sent the money that afternoon. At 30, I covered an insurance deductible because Dad said the timing was terrible. At 33, I paid for a furnace repair. At 35, I started sending them a small recurring transfer because Dad said retirement had made cash flow unpredictable. And I had told myself the same thing every time. They raised me. They sacrificed for me. I could afford it. The reliable daughter helped. My father was still speaking. I'm not asking you to ruin your life. No, you're asking me to finance hers. His face changed. That was when I saw the cake move. 1 second his hand was beside the knife. The next he had grabbed the cut slice from the small plate. Then frosting filled my vision. The cold shock of it made me take half a step backward. Buttercream pressed against my cheek, my nose, the corner of my mouth. The scent of vanilla was suddenly so strong it turned nauseating. Somebody gasped. A fork hit a plate. Daniel said my name. Dad's voice cut through everything. You ungrateful brat. No one laughed. That somehow made it worse. I wiped the frosting from my face. My hand shook once, then stopped. No, I said. Her debt is her problem. Dad opened his mouth. I turned away from him. The venue coordinator stood several feet behind Daniel, frozen with one hand near her headset. I looked straight at her. I need my father removed from the reception. Mom made a sound like I had slapped her. Claire. Dad gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You're throwing your own father out? Yes. Over money? No. I looked at the frosting smeared across my palm. Over this. Daniel stepped beside me, close enough that his sleeve touched mine, but he didn't take over. He didn't tell Dad to leave. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply asked, "What do you want me to do?" That question nearly undid me. Not, "What should we do?" Not, "Do you want me to handle him?" What did I want? I want him out. Daniel nodded. Okay. Security arrived with the coordinator. Dad's face went dark. Mom picked up her purse. If he goes, I go. The old reflex rose so quickly, I could almost taste it beneath the frosting. Stop this. Fix it. Don't let Mom leave angry. I swallowed. That's your choice. Her eyes widened. She followed Dad. Megan stayed behind for several seconds. I expected anger. Instead, she looked genuinely confused. I thought Dad already talked to you. Then she hurried after them. I stood beside what remained of my wedding cake and realized I was more disturbed by those 7 words than I was by the frosting drying against my skin. In the bridal suite, Daniel handed me a clean white towel. There was vanilla frosting on the neckline of my dress, my cheek, and one spot near the hem where a piece had fallen. I dabbed at it carefully. The smell pulled me backward 12 years. I had been 27, sitting in my first apartment with moving boxes still stacked beside the kitchen wall when Dad called. I had just been promoted. He congratulated me for less than a minute before mentioning the property tax. The amount had seemed enormous then. I paid it anyway. Later that week, he came over with takeout, hugged me, and said, "You're the one I don't have to worry about." I had carried that sentence for years like a medal. Standing in my bridal suite, staring at buttercream ground into ivory fabric, I wasn't so sure anymore. Daniel sat in the chair across from me. "We can leave." I looked up. "You want to?" "I want whatever you want." My throat tightened. Outside the closed door, faint music continued. Our music. Our guests. Our reception. For a few minutes, I had been ready to abandon all of it because my father had contaminated the room. Then another thought came. If I left now, the last image I would remember from my wedding would be Dad's hand and white frosting. No. Daniel waited. "I want to go back." "You sure?" "No." That made him smile slightly. "Good answer." I looked at him. He shrugged. "You don't have to be sure, you just have to decide." So I did. The coordinator found a clean shawl from the bridal emergency kit. Someone brought sparkling water. I fixed what makeup I could. Then Daniel and I went back downstairs. Conversation dipped when we entered the ballroom. I felt every eye. My shoulders wanted to curl inward. Instead, I took Daniel's hand and walked toward our table. The coordinator had moved the damaged portion of the cake away. A clean lower tier remained, and the kitchen had already prepared plated desserts for guests. We did not redo the entire cake-cutting moment. We simply cut one small piece together. Daniel fed me a bite. I laughed because his hand shook and he nearly dropped it on my dress. The laughter was real. That mattered. Some guests came over and hugged me. Others approached with expressions that made me brace before they spoke. My Aunt Carol touched my elbow. Your father is very upset. I'm aware. He says he was only trying to help Megan. I nodded. Carol hesitated. He said this was supposed to be settled before the wedding. My fingers tightened around my champagne glass. Settled? She looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't have said anything. No. What did he mean? I assumed you knew. There it was again. I thought Dad already talked to you. I assumed you knew. Two different people. The same missing conversation. I didn't, I said. Carol looked past me toward the dance floor. I'm sorry. That was all I got. I didn't chase her. For the rest of the evening, I refused to turn my reception into an investigation. When somebody said Dad was devastated, I said, tonight isn't the time. When a cousin suggested I call Mom, I said, not tonight. When one relative muttered that weddings made people emotional, I walked away. At the end of the reception, the coordinator asked whether I wanted a short incident note placed in the venue file because security had removed a guest. Yes, I said. Nothing dramatic. No police. No threats. Just a record of what had happened in their space. Then Daniel and I left when we had planned to leave. Not when Dad wanted us to. The next morning, I woke beside my husband with a faint sugar smell still lingering in my hair. For 3 seconds, I didn't remember why. Then my phone lit up. 12 unread messages. I sat against the headboard. Daniel opened one eye. You don't have to read those. I know. That was new too. He didn't tell me to turn the phone off. He reminded me I had a choice. I opened the messages. Dad, you embarrassed me in front of everyone after I came to you asking for help. I hope you're proud of yourself. Mom, please call your father and fix this before it gets bigger. A cousin. I know emotions were high, but he's still your dad. I stopped there. 3 was enough. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. The old Claire began composing immediately. Dad, I'm sorry things got out of hand. But you have to understand that asking me for $80,000 without warning. I deleted it. Tried again. Mom. I didn't want anyone to leave, but deleted. The room was quiet except for the hotel air conditioner. I typed one sentence. I will not pay Megan's business debt. Please do not ask again. I sent it to both my parents. Daniel sat up. How do you feel? Like I just put my hand on a hot stove on purpose. Do you want breakfast? I looked at him. That's your follow-up? Yes. A laugh escaped me. Yes, I want breakfast. He reached for his phone. Room service or downstairs? I was about to say downstairs when mine buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen was Megan. A text. Dad said you changed your mind about the first 20. Thank you. I know you're still mad at me. I read it twice, then a third time. Daniel watched my face. What? I turned the phone toward him but didn't hand it over. He told her, I agreed. Did you? No. Another buzz. The supplier needs it Monday. Dad said you were upset about how he asked, not about helping. I really do appreciate it. My pulse slowed, not because I felt better, because something in my brain had shifted out of wedding mode and into the colder place I used at work. I typed, I did not agree to $20,000. I agreed to 0. The phone rang immediately. Megan. I answered. What is going on? Her voice came fast. Are you serious? Yes. Dad said you'd cooled off. I haven't spoken to Dad. He said you were embarrassed about the reception and that once everything settled down you'd do the first 20. No. A pause. You're really going to let the supplier deadline hit? I didn't know there was a supplier deadline until last night. That's impossible. No, Megan. It isn't. He said he talked to you this week. He didn't. Silence. I stared at the hotel curtains. Then I asked the question I would have asked a vendor making a claim on behalf of someone else. What exactly did Dad tell you? I approved. Megan exhaled sharply. Oh my God. Don't do that. Do what? Cross-examine me. I'm asking one question. On your honeymoon morning? You called me. He said you'd cover the first payment. That's what he said. When? I don't know. A few days ago. By text? Claire, was it by text? I'm not doing this. Megan. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Daniel waited. She hung up. Do you want to call her back? No. And I didn't. We ate breakfast. I even managed half a cup of coffee before my thoughts returned to the same problem. Dad had told Megan he had spoken to me. He hadn't. My aunt had believed the matter was already settled. I had never known there was a matter to settle. Back in our room, Daniel started packing while I opened my laptop. What are you doing? Something normal. He looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. For you, maybe. I ignored him. Organization had never been a crisis response for me. It was how my brain worked. At the hospital, when a department told me a vendor had always charged about that much, I checked the contract. When a supplier called a fee standard, I asked for the schedule. When two people remembered an agreement differently, I found the written version. My father hated it. You can't spreadsheet your way through life, he had told me more than once. Maybe not, but I could spreadsheet my way through a question. I opened a blank sheet. 3 columns. What Dad asked for. Why he said they needed it. What happened next. I started with the easy things I remembered. Furnace repair. Insurance deductible. Property tax. Household shortfall. I pulled my bank records for one transfer from a few months earlier. Dad had called that week saying they were short because of a house expense. I remembered hesitating. Then, sending the money. Nothing illegal. Nothing hidden. I had chosen to send it. Still, something bothered me. That same week, Megan had posted a picture from her boutique with a caption about making it through another rough month. Coincidence was not evidence. I typed one word beside the transfer. Question. Then I searched my messages for that month. Most were ordinary. Mom asking whether we were coming for dinner. Megan sending a picture of a dress. Dad reminding me about an appointment. Then, I found it. An old text from Megan. I had barely noticed it at the time. Dad said you already covered the house stuff, so he can float me until Friday. Thanks for always being okay with this. My hands went still over the keyboard. I read the message again. Then I looked at the transfer date. Same week. Same house stuff. Same father standing in the middle. Back then, I had read Megan's text as casual gratitude. Now it sounded different. Not thanks for helping Mom and Dad. Thanks for always being okay with this. Except no one had asked if I was okay with it. Daniel zipped the suitcase behind me. I stared at the 3 columns on my screen. For years, I had thought the question was why my parents always seemed to need help. That morning, another question replaced it. If Megan believed I had been agreeing all along, then somebody had been speaking in my name for years. The number on my screen stayed there long after Daniel zipped the suitcase. The transfer had been ordinary when I made it. Dad had called on a Tuesday afternoon and said a house expense had landed at the worst possible time. I had sent the money before dinner. Megan's text from that same week had seemed ordinary too. Dad said you already covered the house stuff, so he can float me until Friday. Thanks for always being okay with this. Back then, I had read it as a compliment. Now I read it as evidence of a conversation I had never been part of. Daniel rolled our suitcase toward the hotel door. You ready? Almost. My fingers hovered over the spreadsheet. I could have spent the rest of the morning searching. That would have felt productive, while also saving me from having to decide what any of it meant. Instead, I closed the laptop. One questionable transfer did not prove a decade-long scheme. One questionable transfer was a reason to look at the next one. By Monday morning, my wedding dress was at the cleaner. My father had sent 6 more messages I had not answered, and I was sitting beneath fluorescent lights at work, listening to a department manager explain why a supplier price increase had to be approved immediately. They've already started shipping at the new rate, he said. Across the conference table, Priya slid the vendor notice toward me. It's standard, the manager added. They said raw material costs went up. I read the first page. Then the second. The notice blamed raw materials. The email attached behind it blamed expedited freight. 2 different explanations for the same increase. Which one did they give you? I asked. He frowned. Does it matter? Yes. It's still the same price. It's not the same justification. Priya glanced at me over the rim of her coffee cup. The manager sighed. Claire, we need the parts. I'm not stopping the order. I'm asking them to explain the increase before we accept it as our baseline. 20 minutes later, the vendor admitted part of the charge was temporary freight expense and agreed it should not be rolled permanently into unit pricing. The meeting ended without fireworks. No one pounded a table. No one called anyone ungrateful. We simply separated what had been said from what was actually true. Priya waited until the room emptied. You know, she said, most people would have approved that. That's encouraging. You know what I mean. I do. She collected her notes. You never approve a cost until you know who actually benefits. My hand stopped on my laptop. Priya noticed. What? Nothing. That looked very much like something. I forced a smile. Long weekend. Her expression softened. She had known about the wedding incident because I had called her Sunday evening and told her the shortest possible version before social media could provide a worse one. She had not asked for pictures. She had not asked why Dad did it. She had simply said, "Do you want me to listen, distract you, or help you think?" At the time, I chose distraction. Now I looked down at the vendor packet. 2 explanations. 1 charge. Verify the source. I need to check something, I said. At lunch, instead of going downstairs, I shut my office door and opened my personal bank account. I had expected the search to reassure me. That was the part I had not admitted to Daniel. Somewhere inside me was still the hope that Dad's manipulation began recently, that Megan's business trouble had pushed him into behavior he would never normally choose, that the old transfers would look exactly like what I had believed they were. Parents need help. Daughter helps parents. End of story. I downloaded 9 years of statements. Not every transaction was searchable in the same format, so I worked from what I could document rather than filling gaps from memory. The recurring support alone made my stomach tighten. Then came the larger transfers. Property tax, car repair, furnace, insurance, dental expense, a household shortage around Christmas, a roof repair contribution, a plumbing problem. I excluded birthday gifts, dinners, plane tickets, things I had given because I wanted to give them. The remaining number was just over $60,000. I leaned back. For several seconds, all I could hear was the ventilation above my desk. $60,000 did not ruin me. That almost made it harder. If the money had emptied my retirement account, maybe I would have questioned things sooner. Instead, it had gone out in manageable pieces. $1,200 here, $3,000 there, a few hundred every month. Always survivable. Always explainable. Always attached to a sentence that made saying no feel uglier than paying. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. You've made your point. Put the household transfer back, and we can discuss the rest like adults. I stared at it. He had noticed. Of course he had. The automatic payment normally went out Monday morning. I opened the scheduled transfer page. My finger rested above the cancel button. Mom's voice rose in my head without her actually being there. What if something happens? What if Dad's prescriptions cost more this month? What if they really need it? The familiar fear was not that they would starve. It was that something ordinary would become difficult, and I would have caused the difficulty by refusing to prevent it. That was how the arrangement had survived. I pressed cancel. The confirmation appeared. My pulse jumped as if I had moved money instead of simply stopped moving it. Dad called less than 3 minutes later. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Dad. What are you doing? At work. You know what I mean. Yes. You canceled the transfer. I did. You're punishing your mother because you're angry at me. No. Don't insult me. I'm reviewing my financial commitments. He gave a sharp laugh. Financial commitments. Listen to yourself. The same tone he had used whenever I asked to see a bill before paying it. You humiliated me at my wedding, I said. But that isn't why I canceled it. Then what is? I'm trying to understand what I've actually been paying for. You've been helping your parents. With what? His pause was small. At work, I had learned that small pauses mattered. Not because they proved dishonesty. Because they told me when a question had changed the conversation. Life, he said finally. Bills. Things come up. Which bills this year? Jesus, Claire. I'm asking. This is exactly what I mean. Everything with you has to become some transaction. My grip tightened around the phone. You asked me for $80,000 at my wedding. For your sister. And now asking what I've already contributed makes me transactional? You have more than she does. That isn't an answer. Dad exhaled through his nose. The one who's doing better carries the one who's struggling. That's what decent people do. The sentence should have sounded generous. Instead, I heard the part he had left undefined. Who decided who was doing better? Who decided who was struggling? And who decided how much one person had to carry before she was allowed to put something down? Which person have I been carrying? I asked. He went quiet. Mom? I continued. You? Megan? You're being ridiculous. Which one? I'm not doing an accounting exercise with my own daughter. Then don't. You think Megan asked for this? I didn't say she did. She never asked you for a dime. Something inside me clicked into place. Not proof. A distinction. I didn't ask whether she asked me. Dad said nothing. I asked whether my money made it possible for you to give money to her. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. His voice hardened. Call me when you're ready to stop talking like I'm one of your vendors. The call ended. I sat with the phone against my palm. Megan never asked you for a dime. He had chosen that sentence carefully enough to answer a question I had not asked. By the time I got home, the number on my spreadsheet no longer felt like $60,000. It felt like 60,000 unanswered questions. Daniel was chopping vegetables when I came into the kitchen. You ate lunch? He asked. Yes. An actual lunch? Yes. That hesitation cost you credibility. I put my bag down. He glanced at me. Bad day? Productive. That sounds worse. I opened the laptop at the kitchen island. He kept chopping. No hovering. No reading over my shoulder. That was one of the things I had not understood I needed until I married him. Someone could care what I was doing without assuming care gave them ownership of the decision. I added it up, I said. How much? Just over 60,000 that I can document. That doesn't include normal gifts. The knife stopped. Daniel looked at me. That's a lot. Yes. He didn't ask how I had allowed it. I had already asked myself that enough times. 3 periods stood out. The first was 6 years earlier. Dad told me the property taxes had increased and retirement timing was bad. The bank record showed my transfer. That same month, Megan had posted photos celebrating the boutique, surviving its roughest quarter yet. I marked it as correlation, not conclusion. The second was 3 years later. Mom's car needed repairs. Dad said the cost wiped out their cushion. I covered part of it. 4 days later, Megan posted a photo of Dad bringing champagne to the store with the caption, "My hero came through again." Correlation. The third was last year. Dad said an insurance payment and home repair landed together. I sent money. That week, Megan had thanked him publicly for saving the shop again. The amount I transferred was not the same amount Megan claimed he gave her. That mattered. If I wanted an accusation, messy numbers would have been inconvenient. If I wanted the truth, they were useful. The pattern did not look like Dad taking my check and handing the exact same check to Megan. It looked like something less obvious. I covered an expense he would otherwise have covered. That left his own money available for something else. Daniel put 2 plates on the table. So what do you think? I think I don't know enough. That doesn't sound like you. It sounds exactly like me. He smiled. The next afternoon I texted Megan. Can we meet? Just us. I want to ask about what Dad told you. Coffee shop near your store? Her answer came 15 minutes later. Fine. But I'm not apologizing for Dad. Neither am I. She chose a coffee shop 2 blocks from the boutique. When I arrived, Megan was already seated near the window, with her phone face up beside her cup. The screen lit before I reached the table. She looked at it, pressed decline, and turned it over. Hi. Her phone buzzed again before I sat. This time, she read the notification. Her jaw tightened. Everything okay? No. I waited. She looked at me as if waiting were another form of interrogation. The supplier's done with me. The one with the Monday deadline? Yes. What does done mean? They terminated the account. Their attorney emailed me. They're moving forward with collection. The words were frightening, but not mysterious. No police. No dramatic locks appearing on the boutique overnight. A business obligation had gone unpaid, and the other business was acting like a creditor. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "But not sorry enough to help." There it was. "I'm not paying it. You don't have to repeat that every 5 minutes." "You brought it up." Megan grabbed her cup. "Dad said you were going to help. I planned around that. Which is why I need to know what he told you." She laughed without humor. "Of course. Here comes the audit. I'm not asking about your whole business. Could have fooled me. I want the things Dad told you about money coming from me." Her gaze moved toward the window. "That goes back years." "I know. Why do you even care now?" "Because apparently you believed I approved things I didn't know existed." Megan's mouth tightened. "He always said you knew." "What did that mean?" "What do you mean, what did it mean?" "Exactly what words did he use?" She pushed her coffee away. "Claire, this is exhausting." "So is learning people have been making financial commitments in my name." "He never forged your name." "I didn't say he did." "You're making him sound like some criminal." "I didn't say that either." She stared at me. The defensive anger on her face was so familiar that for a moment I saw every childhood argument we had ever had. Megan broke a lamp. I should stop tattling. Megan borrowed a sweater without asking. I should be generous. Megan needed help moving. I had the bigger car. Even our fights had usually ended with a reason I should have absorbed more. "I just need to know what you were told," I said. She crossed her arms. "He'd say you were covering Mom and Dad that month, or that you already took care of the house bill. Then he'd say he could help me." "How often?" "I don't know. Once a year? Every month?" I said I don't know. "Did he ever tell you I had agreed to that arrangement?" "Yes." The answer came too fast. My stomach contracted. "What did he say?" "That you were fine with it." "Did he ever show you a message from me?" "No." "Did you ever ask me?" Her chair shifted. "Why would I?" "Because it involved my money." "It didn't involve your money. Dad gave me his money." "That he had because I was paying expenses he would otherwise pay." "Oh, come on. That's why I'm asking." "No. You're asking because you want me to say Dad stole from you." "I don't think he stole from me." That stopped her. For the first time since I sat down, Megan looked uncertain rather than angry. "I chose to send every transfer," I said. "That's part of what makes this hard. What I'm trying to understand is whether I was given enough information to know what I was supporting." Her phone rang. She looked at the name. Declined it. "Another creditor? That's none of your business." "Okay." The word seemed to annoy her more than another question would have. "You know what your problem is?" Megan asked. "I suspect you're going to tell me. You've always done this." "Done what?" "Acted like the family accountant. Everybody has to explain themselves to you. Then you help anyway. And later you act resentful that anyone needed you." I opened my mouth, then closed it. The accusation was unfair. It was also not entirely false. Nobody had forced me to set up that recurring transfer. Nobody had made me answer every emergency call. I had said yes because yes earned praise. Yes made me useful. Yes kept me in the position I understood. Then I had quietly waited for someone to notice what yes cost me. Megan saw my hesitation and mistook it for surrender. "Exactly." "No." Her expression sharpened. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I kept saying yes without setting limits. That's mine. It doesn't make Dad entitled to tell you I agreed to things he never asked me about." She looked down at the table. "Show me the messages." "No, Megan. They're private conversations with Dad. They involve me. He was helping me." "Then why tell you I approved it?" She stood and hooked her purse over her shoulder. "I'm done." "So you won't show me?" "No." That refusal hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed I was entitled to her phone. Because it made the easiest explanation rush back in. Maybe she had known. Maybe she had always known. Maybe Dad was not the only one who had found it convenient for Claire to remain the reliable one. I stood too. Megan took 2 steps, then stopped. "You really didn't know?" "Know what?" She looked over her shoulder. "That he was moving things around because you were covering Mom and Dad?" "No." Her face changed in a way I couldn't name. Then she left. I sat back down. The coffee had gone lukewarm. For the first time since the wedding, anger gave way to something worse. Possibility. Megan might have been protecting Dad. She might have been protecting herself. Or she might have been telling the truth when she said she thought I knew. Those options required completely different decisions. I refused to choose between them without evidence. That evening, no screenshots came. I was relieved, then disappointed with myself for being relieved. The next morning, my phone vibrated while I was brushing my teeth. 3 images from Megan. A message above them read, "This is what he told me. I need to know which one of you is lying." I sat on the edge of the bed. The first screenshot was from 2 years earlier. Dad to Megan. "Claire's covering the insurance and house stuff this month. I can get you through Friday." The second, "Don't call her about it. She already knows we're helping you." The third was from the previous year. "Your sister has Mom and me covered. No need to call Claire about it. She'll turn it into a whole spreadsheet." A short, ugly laugh escaped me. Of all the things Dad could have written, Daniel came out of the bathroom. "What happened?" He was right about the spreadsheet. I showed him only after asking, "Can I show you something Megan sent me?" He nodded. The dates mattered more than the words. At the kitchen table, I opened my records. The first screenshot lined up exactly with an insurance-related transfer. The second lined up exactly with another household payment. The third was off by several days. I checked twice. Still off. Strangely, that made me trust the pattern more. Real life rarely aligned into perfect columns. Dad had not been taking my money and secretly sending the identical amount to Megan. He had been doing something easier to defend. If Mom and Dad had $4,000 of their own available for the month and a $4,000 household expense came due, that money should have gone toward the household. If I paid the expense instead, Dad still had his $4,000. Then he could give part of it to Megan. My gift to my parents was real. His gift to Megan was real. What had been false was my understanding of why my parents kept needing help. I had not been funding Megan directly. I had been creating the empty space in Dad's budget that allowed him to keep funding her. Daniel read the screenshots again. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to try to prove myself wrong." He leaned back. "That sounds miserable." "It's safer." At work, Priya found me staring at the chronology during lunch. I had removed names and exact amounts before bringing anything onto my work laptop. What remained was a stripped-down sequence of dates, requests, and outcomes. "You look like you're about to fire a vendor," she said. "I'm trying not to fire my father. That sentence makes me want to leave." "Sit." She sat. I explained the structure without handing her private messages. Person A tells me there is a household expense. I voluntarily pay part of it. Person A then uses money freed by my payment to help Person B. Person B is told I know and approve. I am not told Person B is receiving the help. Priya listened. When I finished, she asked, "What exactly are you trying to prove?" "That my money was diverted." "Was it?" "No." "Then don't use that word." I stared at her. That was annoyingly fast. "You trained me." I crossed out diverted. Priya tapped the table once. "Are you trying to prove where every dollar went?" "I don't know." "Or are you trying to decide whether you consented to the system?" The question lodged under my ribs. Consent. Not criminality. Not theft. Not whether Dad could produce receipts proving the furnace really broke. The furnace could have broken. The property taxes could have been due. Mom's car really could have needed repairs. All of that could be true. The missing fact was what Dad had already chosen to do with the money he would have used for those things. My chronology did not need to prove a crime. It needed to answer a simpler question. Would I have continued sending money if I had known it was repeatedly helping Dad protect Megan from consequences? The answer came immediately. No. At home that night, I changed the wording in my spreadsheet. What Dad asked for. What he said it was for. What was happening elsewhere. Then one more note beside several entries. I was not told. The next source was obvious. Mom. For years, Dad had spoken for her almost as often as he spoke for Megan. Your mother needs this. Your mother is worried. Your mother doesn't want to bother you. Mom had always been present in the story, rarely in the conversation. My fingers rested on the phone. This should have been easy. She was my mother. Instead, asking her directly felt almost disloyal, as if Dad had somehow become the authorized interpreter of his own marriage. I typed anyway. Mom, when Dad told me you needed money over the years, did you know he was also sending money to Megan? The message showed delivered. No answer. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Daniel washed dishes behind me. I resisted the urge to send a softer version. I'm not blaming you. Maybe I misunderstood. Don't worry about answering tonight. Those sentences crowded my throat. For once, I let the question stand without cushioning it. Nearly 40 minutes later, the screen lit. Mom? I opened it. I knew he helped her. I didn't know what he told you. I read the sentence slowly. Then once more, Dad had not simply been moving money, he had been moving information. And every one of us had been given just enough of the truth to keep him in the middle. Mom's message stayed on my screen until the words began to look less like a confession and more like a door. I knew he helped her. I didn't know what he told you. For years, that would have been enough to send me into repair mode. I would have called Dad first, because Dad was the person who explained what everyone else meant. He would have told me Mom was confused, or Megan was embarrassed, or I was reading too much into a sentence. Then I would have thanked him for clearing things up. That night, I did something different. I called Mom. She answered on the fourth ring. Claire. Her voice already carried the carefulness I knew too well. Can we meet tomorrow? A pause. Your father thinks everybody needs a few days. I'm not asking, Dad. I know. Just you and me. Another pause. Okay. We met the next afternoon at a diner halfway between my office and my parents' house. Mom was already in a booth when I arrived, stirring coffee she had not put sugar in. Her purse sat beside her, instead of across from her. That small choice told me she expected me to sit opposite her, not beside her. I slid into the booth. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Mom said, I don't want this turning into some kind of investigation. I'm not investigating you. That isn't what your father says. There it was. I folded my hands on the table. What does Dad say I'm doing? She looked down at her coffee. That you're going through old bank statements trying to make him look dishonest. I'm looking at my own bank statements. He says you've always known we helped Megan. I knew you helped her. Mom looked up. I didn't know my money was making that help possible. Her mouth tightened. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. The waitress came over before Mom could respond. I ordered tea. Mom said she was fine with coffee. When we were alone again, I took out a small notebook. Not the spreadsheet. That would have made her feel like she was sitting across from procurement Claire, rather than her daughter. Can I ask you about 3 times I sent money? She sighed. Claire. 3. Her fingers closed around the coffee cup. Fine. I started with the furnace. Yes, she said. That was real. I know. The whole unit had to be replaced. Did you and Dad have money to replace it? Her forehead creased. What do you mean? I mean, if I hadn't paid part of it, could you have paid it? She looked uncomfortable. We would have figured something out. That's not what I'm asking. The tea arrived. I waited until the waitress left. Mom, were you broke? No. The answer was quiet. My fingers tightened around the notebook. Were you ever broke? Not broke. How should I describe it? She stared toward the window. Sometimes, things were tight. Because of normal expenses? Sometimes. And sometimes? Her spoon clicked once against the coffee cup. Your father helped Megan. There was no dramatic revelation in the words. That almost made them worse. How much? I don't know everything. What do you know? He handled most of the accounts. That isn't what I asked. Her eyes lifted sharply. You sound just like you do at work. The old shame flashed hot under my ribs. Too exacting. Too difficult. Too transactional. I let it pass. How much do you know about? Mom rubbed her thumb over the handle of her cup. Enough to know it was more than he told you. The diner suddenly seemed too bright. Did you think I knew? Sometimes. Sometimes. He said you preferred not to discuss money in detail. I gave a short laugh. Mom flinched. Sorry, I said. Then I stopped. No. I wasn't sorry for laughing at something absurd. I literally discuss money for a living. I know. So why would you believe that? She folded the paper napkin beside her cup into a smaller square. Because it was easier. The answer landed harder than denial would have. Not because she had been tricked. Because part of her had chosen not to look. I opened the notebook. The car repair 3 years ago. Real. You had the money? Technically. That word. Technically. What had Dad already done with it? Mom's shoulders dropped. He gave Megan money for payroll. I wrote nothing. The notebook stayed open beneath my hand. And the insurance and home repair last year? She closed her eyes for a second. He had already covered some overdue bills for the boutique. A pattern did not need perfect numbers anymore. It had people. It had decisions. And it had a person in the middle deciding who was allowed to know which part. You and Dad have enough income for your normal household, don't you? Mom stiffened. We're retired. It's not like we're rich. I didn't ask if you were rich. She looked away. Your father has his retirement income. I have Social Security and my pension. Enough for ordinary expenses? If we're careful, and when you weren't careful? That isn't fair. I'm not talking about vacations. Her eyes came back to mine. I'm talking about Megan. The paper napkin tore between her fingers. Mom looked down at it. Your father always believed if one child was struggling and the other was doing well, you helped the one who was struggling. By hiding the reason you needed money from the one who was doing well? He didn't see it that way. How did he see it? She hesitated. As moving things around. The exact phrase Megan had used. Something tightened at the base of my neck. Mom, when Dad told me at the wedding that if I paid the first $20,000, he would handle the rest, what did that mean? Her face changed. It was small, but I saw it. He said he had options. What options? I don't want to get into that. Did he have $60,000 available? No. The answer came immediately. What was his plan? She rubbed both palms over the table edge. He talked about the house. What about it? A home equity line. I stared at her. Were you willing to do that? No. The word was firmer than anything she had said since I sat down. No? I told him I was not borrowing against our house for Megan's store. When? Before the wedding. So Dad had stood in front of me on Saturday and said, "Give us $20,000. I'll handle the rest." While the person whose signature mattered to part of that plan had already told him no. What else? He mentioned taking some money from retirement. Had he done it? No. Had he arranged it? Not that I know. I sat back. Dad had not been demanding the first 20 because he already had the rest. He needed the first 20 because he had promised a rescue that depended on 2 women eventually becoming easier to manage. Me. Mom. How long did he know about the supplier deadline? Mom shook her head. I don't know. Did he tell you he was going to ask me at the wedding? Her eyes dropped. No. That answer I believed. Then she reached into her purse. I brought something. My stomach tightened. She placed her phone on the table. I don't know if this is what you want. What is it? Messages. I didn't touch the phone. You want me to read them? She nodded. The first conversation was from weeks earlier. Dad. Claire doesn't need every detail. She makes things harder than they have to be. Mom. She should know if this is about Megan again. Dad. Claire likes helping. She just doesn't like feeling told what to do. I felt heat spread across my face. The second message was from before the wedding. Mom. I am not signing anything against the house for the store. Dad. We'll talk after Claire puts up the first 20. It'll be easier, once we have breathing room. The third was shorter. Mom. Does Claire know? Dad. She knows enough. I handed the phone back. No theft. No forged signature. No secret offshore account. Just a man deciding what everyone else needed to know. Mom tucked the phone into her purse. Your father always knew you would be okay. The sentence hit me so hard I forgot to breathe. He had said it the night he brought takeout to my first apartment. You're the one I don't have to worry about. For more than a decade, I had heard that as pride. Now, another translation sat beside it. You can take the hit. You knew I would be okay too, I said. Mom's mouth parted. I never wanted you hurt. That isn't the same as protecting me. She looked down. For once, I didn't rescue her from the sentence. On the drive home, another memory came back. Dad had told a story every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. His mother had a younger brother who was always struggling. Bad jobs, bad timing, bad investments. Every few years, Grandma would empty savings to help him. Dad always told the story with admiration. She never let somebody she loved go under while she had something left. As a teenager, I had thought it was beautiful. At 39, sitting at a red light with Mom's words replaying in my head, I heard the missing half. Grandma was never allowed to be the one who had something left. The person who managed well became the person whose resources were permanently available. The person who struggled became the person whose choices never had to fully arrive. Dad had not invented his doctrine out of nowhere. That mattered. It did not excuse him. For the first time, I could hold both thoughts without forcing one to cancel the other. Maybe he genuinely believed strong people carried weak ones. Maybe he had watched that model his whole life and called it love. He had still lied by omission. He had still volunteered my money before asking. He had still thrown cake into my face when I refused to perform the role he had chosen for me. Understanding the origin of a rule did not make me subject to it. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Megan. I answered from the parked car. What's wrong? A man came to the store. My hand tightened around the steering wheel. What man? He served me papers. I closed my eyes, briefly. The supplier? Yes. Her voice sounded smaller than it had at the coffee shop. What do the papers say? That they're suing for the balance. No police. No locks on the door. No one hauling racks out of the boutique. Just consequence arriving on paper. I'm sorry. Dad says this can still be fixed. There was that word again. Fixed. What do you want, Megan? What? You called me. What do you want from me? A pause. I need to know what I'm supposed to do. I can't answer that for you. You deal with contracts all day. Hospital purchasing contracts, not your business debt. That's not what I mean. I know. She let out a frustrated breath. The total is spread around. Business credit, the supplier, a couple smaller vendors. So, the entire $80,000 isn't due today. No. Is the boutique closing tomorrow? No. Can you close it? Silence. Yes. Can you sell inventory? Yes. Can you work somewhere else? Obviously. Each answer took some of the mythology out of the number. 80,000 was still terrible. It was not a cliff with my money standing at the bottom, holding a net. Dad always said closing would ruin me. How? You know what he means. No. Tell me. He said people would think I failed. There it was. Not homelessness. Not hunger. Humiliation. A business Dad had encouraged her to keep alive because shutting it down would look worse than debt. He made it sound like losing the store was the worst thing that could happen, Megan said. And what do you think? I don't know. Her voice cracked slightly, then hardened, as if she regretted it. Did you really not know he was using your help that way? No. I thought you agreed. I know. And you think that makes me stupid? No. Greedy? I think you liked believing I agreed, because it made taking the help easier. Nothing came back for several seconds. That's not fair. Maybe not. You've always had more. That doesn't answer what I said. Her breathing came through the speaker. Then, very quietly, she said, Okay. It was not an apology. I did not ask for one. You didn't know every detail, I said. That matters. But not knowing every detail is not the same as having no responsibility. She inhaled sharply. So what, you want me to suffer? No. Then help me. The request came directly. For the first time. New Dad. No, Mom. No message carried through someone else. My chest tightened anyway. How much? I asked. The first 20 would still give me leverage to negotiate. There it was. The exact amount. The amount Dad had demanded. The amount I could pay without destroying my life. The amount large enough to hurt but small enough to tempt me. Will you pay any of it? Megan asked. My eyes rested on the steering wheel. A week earlier, I might have said I needed time. I might have promised to look at my savings. I might have turned her consequences into my research project. No. The word came out quietly. Megan said nothing. No, I repeated. I won't pay your business debt. She hung up. I sat in the car for another minute before going inside. Daniel was reading at the kitchen table. He glanced up. You okay? No. He closed the book. What happened? I told him. Not every detail. Enough. Mom's messages. The house equity plan. Megan's papers. My answer. Daniel listened without interrupting. Then my phone rang again. Dad. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hi. His voice was different from the wedding. Measured. Your mother tells me you two talked. She told you? She's my wife. Not an answer. I'm calling because this has gone far enough. I agree. That's good. He sounded relieved. For one irrational second, hope rose. Maybe he had understood. Maybe he was about to say the words I had spent most of my life earning. I was wrong. I'll apologize to Daniel, Dad said. My grip tightened around the phone. For what? For how Saturday got out of hand. Not for humiliating me. Not for demanding money. Not for telling Megan I had agreed. For how things got out of hand. I'll also tell your mother it shouldn't have happened that way. That way. Claire, don't do this. Do what? Pick apart every word. I looked across the kitchen at Daniel. He could hear only my side. He stayed where he was. Dad continued. I'm not asking you for 80 anymore. That's generous. 20. There it was. 20 toward getting this settled. I'll handle the rest. Through the house? The pause was immediate. What did your mother tell you? Enough. That house is between your mother and me. So is whether she agrees to borrow against it. I have other money. Have you arranged it? Why does that matter? Because you're asking me to contribute based on a plan you don't actually have secured. His voice sharpened. You're making this impossible. No, I'm asking what exists. I told you I'll handle the rest. And Linda already told you no on the house. Your mother gets nervous. She'll calm down. A chill moved through me. Not fear. Recognition. There it was again. He had already translated Mom's no into something temporary. Just like mine. Dad, why did Megan think I had agreed before you even asked me at the wedding? He exhaled. We talked about that. No, we didn't. I knew you'd help. That isn't the same as me agreeing. You always help. That still is an agreement. Claire, you are focusing on wording while your sister is being sued. The old version of me felt the hook set. Sued. Sister. 20,000. Apology. Normal. The amount was survivable. Painful, yes. But survivable. Daniel and I would delay some plans. Move some money. Take the hit. Then Dad would apologize. Mom would stop sounding afraid on the phone. Megan might stop looking at me like I had personally pushed her business over a cliff. Thanksgiving might still look like Thanksgiving. For one frightening moment, $20,000 looked cheap. Dad seemed to hear the hesitation. One last time, he said, softer now. Help her one last time. Then we put this behind us. My mouth went dry. How many last times have there been? What? Nothing, Claire. He sounded almost kind. We can get back to normal. That was the offer. Not money for debt. Money for belonging. My eyes closed. Then Dad made the mistake that finished it. You don't need to talk to Megan about every detail. I'm handling it. The temptation vanished. Not completely. Enough. Good night, Dad. Claire, wait. I ended the call. Daniel didn't ask what I had decided. He waited until I put the phone down. Then he said, What are you thinking? That 20,000 is a lot less than 80. Yes. I could do it. Yes. I hate that you're agreeing with me. I'm agreeing that you could. I rubbed my hands over my face. He'd apologize. Maybe. He said he would. Daniel stayed quiet. He'd apologize to you, I said. I don't need $20,000 for an apology. Despite everything, I laughed. Then the laugh disappeared. What if this is the point where I could stop all of it? Daniel leaned forward. Can I ask you one thing? Please. If he never apologizes, what decision would you still respect tomorrow? The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. For years, I had treated apologies like receipts. Proof that I had earned the right to be hurt. Proof that a boundary was justified. Proof that I could protect myself without being the villain. What if none came? Would the facts change? No payment, I said. Daniel nodded. That sounds like your answer. My laptop was still on the counter. I opened a blank message. Not to Dad alone. To all three of them. Mom. Dad. Megan. The first version was 6 paragraphs. I deleted it. The second explained the chronology. Deleted. The third defended the wedding. Deleted. Finally, I wrote what actually mattered. I will not pay Megan's business debt. I have stopped the automatic household transfer. If Mom needs help with something, Mom can ask me directly. If Megan wants to ask me something, Megan can ask me directly. Dad, you do not have permission to promise my money, speak for me about money, or carry financial requests to me on someone else's behalf. I read it 3 times, then added one final sentence. I may still say no. My finger hovered over send. This was not how we communicated. Dad liked private calls. Mom liked smoothing things afterward. Megan liked messages that arrived through Dad, already translated into something easier to accept. Sending one version to everyone felt almost indecent, like opening curtains in a room we had agreed to keep dim. I pressed send. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then Mom reacted with a thumbs up. Megan wrote, "Understood." Dad said nothing. An hour later, Megan sent me a screenshot. Dad to Megan, "Don't panic. Claire's open to discussing timing. Dinner this weekend and we'll settle the amount." My jaw tightened. I had been explicit. 0 was not timing. Another message arrived. "Mom, your father says your group text was just because you're still upset and that you'll feel differently after you cool off. Is that true?" I stared at the screen. He was doing it in real time. Not years ago. Not through fuzzy memory. Not through old transfers. I had written the same words to all 3 people. He had already created 2 new versions. My hands stopped shaking. That was the moment I stopped trying to make him understand the boundary. He understood it. He simply did not accept that I had the authority to set it. I opened my chronology. Not 9 years of records. Not a binder. 3 pages. Page 1. What he told me. Page 2. What he told Megan. Page 3. What he told Mom. Dates. Short phrases. No adjectives. No diagnosis. No word like liar. Just versions. At 11 that night, Dad's group message came through. "Dinner Saturday. Just us. We are going to settle this as a family. No more screenshots. No more spreadsheets." I read it twice. Then I looked at the 3 pages beside my laptop. For the first time, I was not going to that table to ask him for the truth. I was going to remove his right to be the only person allowed to tell it. By Friday afternoon, the 3 pages on my desk looked almost insultingly ordinary. No dramatic photographs. No highlighted accusations. No title page that said what my father had done. Just dates, amounts, and words people had actually written. The first page contained payments I could document from my own accounts and the reasons Dad had given when he asked for them. Property tax, furnace, insurance, household shortage, car repair. The second page placed those dates beside messages Megan and Mom had voluntarily shown me. "Claire has the house stuff covered. Your sister already knows we're helping you. Don't bother her with the details." The third page was the shortest. My refusal at the wedding. Megan's message thanking me for $20,000 I had never promised. My written group message stating that Dad did not have permission to commit my money. Then the 2 versions he had created afterward. Claire's open to discussing timing. Claire's just cooling off. At the bottom of the last page, I had originally typed a heading, Dad's explanation. The column beneath it was empty. I stared at it for several seconds, then left it that way. For most of my life, I had supplied explanations for him before he needed to. Dad was worried. Dad was old-fashioned. Dad meant well. Dad was trying to protect Megan. Dad didn't understand how the words sounded. There was always another sentence waiting to soften whatever came before it. Not this time. Priya appeared at my office door holding 2 coffees. "You look like you slept here." "I didn't." "You considered it." Briefly. She set 1 cup beside my keyboard. The document on my screen had names shortened to initials. I had not brought anyone's private screenshots onto the hospital network. The actual copies were on my personal laptop at home. What Priya saw was only the structure. "You wanted me to check readability?" she asked. "Yes." She sat. For 5 minutes she read without speaking. That alone told me more than a dozen compliments would have. Finally, she tapped the first page. "Every line here has a source. My bank records or messages sent directly to me." The second page? Screenshots shared voluntarily by the people in the conversations. And the last? My own messages plus what they forwarded to me afterward. Priya leaned back. Then why is this blank? Her finger rested beside Dad's explanation. Because I don't know it. You could guess. I've spent years doing that. A corner of her mouth lifted. Don't start again Saturday. That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Saturday afternoon, Daniel found me standing in front of the bedroom mirror in jeans and a dark sweater. You've changed twice. I know. Are you choosing clothes or armor? Apparently both. He sat on the edge of the bed. You still want to go alone? Yes. There had never been pressure from him to attend. That mattered. Dad's dinner invitation had said immediate family. If Daniel came, Dad could make the evening about outsiders, husbands, influence, and how marriage had changed me. This was simpler. I wanted to walk into the house as Robert Bennett's daughter and walk out without the job description that had come with the title. Daniel picked up my keys from the dresser. I can drive. No. Okay. You gave up fast. You said no. The simplicity of that answer almost hurt. He handed me the keys. If you want me afterward, call. Not, I'll come in if it gets bad. Not, I'll straighten him out. Just a door I could choose to use. The 3 copies went into my bag. At 6:20, I pulled into my parents' driveway. The porch light was already on. For years, that house had made me straighten my posture before I walked in. The same brass numbers beside the door. Same hydrangea bushes Mom trimmed too aggressively every spring. Same narrow entryway where Megan and I used to drop our backpacks. My hand rested on the doorknob. Then the door opened from inside. Dad looked at me. You're late. I checked the clock on the hallway wall. 6:29. Dinner was at 6:30. No, I'm not. His mouth tightened. There was my first small victory of the evening. Not because I had corrected him. Because I didn't apologize anyway. Mom had set the dining table exactly as she had for decades. Dad at the head. Mom to his right. Megan halfway down. My old chair sat closest to the kitchen door. I stopped beside it. Dad pulled out his napkin. Sit down. For a second, muscle memory almost lowered me into that chair. Closest to the kitchen had always meant easiest to get up for water. For bread. For another plate. For whatever anyone had forgotten. Instead, I walked around the table and took the chair opposite Megan. Not Dad's seat. I did not want his place. I wanted mine. Megan glanced at my bag. Mom noticed too. Dad did not mention it. Dinner began with roast chicken, potatoes, and the kind of conversation people make when everybody knows conversation is not why they are there. Dad asked about work. Mom mentioned the weather. Megan barely touched her food. My fork scraped softly against the plate. Finally, Dad set his down. All right. The room seemed to exhale. We're going to settle this tonight. No, I said. His brows drew together. We're going to talk tonight. Whether anything gets settled depends on what you mean by settled. See? He looked at Mom, then Megan. This is what I mean. Everything has to be difficult. Nobody answered. Dad turned back to me. Your sister is being sued. Her business is collapsing. Your mother and I are trying to figure out how to help her, and you've decided this is the right time to punish everyone because your feelings were hurt at the wedding. The wedding is not why I'm here. You had me thrown out. You put cake in my face after I said no. His hand moved dismissively. I lost my temper. One sentence, Dad. What? That's all I'm saying about the wedding tonight. I said no. You did not accept the answer. His chair creaked when he leaned back. So that's it? Your sister goes under because you learned the word no? Megan's fork stopped halfway to her plate. Dad looked at her. Tell her what happens if she walks away from you now. The old rhythm was so familiar I almost missed what happened next. Megan put the fork down. No. Dad stared at her. What? I'm not doing that. Doing what? Making Claire responsible for what happens to the store. Something shifted across the table. Not allegiance. Not forgiveness. Just one person refusing the line assigned to her. Dad's voice became careful. I didn't say she was responsible. You told me she agreed to the first 20. You misunderstood. Megan's face tightened. No. I didn't. Dad looked at me. Did you two rehearse this? I reached into my bag. No. 3 sets of paper landed softly on the table. One for Mom. One for Megan. One in front of me. Dad got nothing. His gaze dropped to the pages. What is this? Things I can prove. He gave a dry laugh. Of course. I did not respond. Mom began reading. Megan turned immediately to the second page. Dad watched both of them instead of looking at me. That interested me. The first date I read aloud was from 6 years earlier. March. You told me you were short on property taxes. I transferred $3,200. Dad opened his mouth. I lifted one hand. I'm not saying the tax bill wasn't real. He closed it again. 3 days later, you texted Megan that I had the house covered and you could send her money until the end of the month. Megan looked down at her copy. Dad said, "That doesn't mean your money went to her." I know. That answer stopped him. I'm not claiming it did. My voice sounded steadier than my hands felt beneath the table. I paid a bill you otherwise would have paid. That left your money available for something else. What I wasn't told was that your cash was already being committed to Megan. Dad's eyes narrowed. That's called helping your children. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't need your permission to give Megan my money. You needed my permission to make decisions based on mine. No one moved. The next date was the car repair, then the insurance and home expense. Only 3 examples, enough to show the pattern without turning dinner into a decade-long audit. Mom's page made a faint sound as she turned it over. I looked at Dad. When you asked me for help, you told me about Mom and the house. When you talked to Megan, you told her I already knew you were helping her. That's because you did know we helped her. I knew you helped her. I did not know your repeated shortages were partly happening because you had already committed money to her. You're splitting hairs. No. My finger moved to the 3rd page. After the wedding, I wrote in the same message to all 3 of you that I would pay $0 and that you did not have permission to promise my money. Dad shifted in his chair. You were emotional. Then you told Megan I was discussing timing. Megan raised her phone. You did. Dad looked at her. I was trying to keep you from panicking. You told me she was still working on the 20. That is not what I meant. Mom spoke quietly. You told me Claire was cooling off. Dad turned toward her. I said she needed time. You said she'd feel differently. The room became very still. For the first time all evening, Dad did not have an immediate answer. His fork remained on the plate. His hand lay beside it. Then his eyes moved to Megan's phone, to Mom's pages, to mine. The silence stretched long enough that the refrigerator compressor clicked on in the kitchen. Finally he asked, "Who gave you those messages?" There it was. Not, "Those dates are wrong." Not, "That never happened." Who gave you those messages? Megan's shoulders moved slightly. I did. Mom looked at Dad. And I showed her mine. His lips pressed together. You're sharing private conversations now? You were using private conversations to tell each of us something different, I said. Dad's gaze returned to me. I moved money where this family needed it. Somebody had to. The sentence was almost calm. That made it more revealing than shouting would have been. There was no embarrassment in the principle, only resentment that the mechanism had been exposed. You decided where everyone's money was needed, I said. No. I kept this family afloat. You kept Megan's business afloat. She's your sister. I know exactly who she is. And your mother is your mother. Mom's fingers tightened around her napkin. Dad pointed toward Megan. She would have lost everything years ago if I hadn't stepped in. Megan looked up. The boutique, Dad. What? I would have lost the boutique. You don't know what would have happened. I know I could have gotten a job. His eyes hardened. After everything I invested in you. The sentence landed differently now. Megan stared at him. Dad turned toward Mom before the moment could settle. And now Claire has you questioning every decision we made in our own house. Mom frowned. I questioned the HELOC before Claire knew about it. That's different. How? You were nervous. No, Mom said. I said no. My breath caught. There it was again. The translation. No became nervous. 0 became timing. Boundary became anger. Dad rubbed one hand across his jaw. This is exactly why I handled things. None of you see the whole picture. I almost smiled. For years, that sentence would have won. None of us saw the whole picture because he was the one holding the pieces apart. Now all 3 copies lay open on the same table. What whole picture am I missing? I asked. He looked at me. Megan needed help. She agrees. Megan's head lifted. I needed help. That doesn't mean Claire agreed to give it. Dad turned to her. So now you're taking her side? No. The word came quickly. I'm taking my own. Dad's expression flattened. He faced Mom. And you? Mom looked tired. I'm not putting the house behind the store. We already discussed that. We did. I said no. Dad gave a humorless laugh. Great, so Claire has managed to make everybody afraid to help each other. The sentence landed in the middle of the table. I waited. Nobody picked it up. Dad tried again. Megan, she's making your failure public. Megan tapped the paper. There are 4 people in this room. Linda, your daughter is trying to dictate how we run our money. Mom answered without looking at me. My pension is part of our money. Then he turned to me. When Megan loses that store, you're going to know you could have stopped it. There it was. The hook designed specifically for me. You could have fixed it. You chose not to. The reliable daughter was still somewhere inside my chest, reaching for a checkbook. My hands went flat against my thighs. She can close the store, I said. Dad scoffed. That easy for you? No. Then stop acting like it is. I didn't say it was easy. Megan looked down. The supplier already filed. Paying Claire's 20 now wouldn't erase everything anyway. Dad's head snapped toward her. You don't know that. My name is on the complaint. He went still again. The pauses were getting longer. Every attempt to redirect the room now had someone in it who could answer from her own experience. No messenger required. No translation. Dad pushed his plate away. Fine. The word came out, clipped. If you don't want help going through me, I'll stay out of it. He sat back as if he had just withdrawn something precious. A month earlier, the threat would have frightened me. Dad staying out meant no one coordinating, no one smoothing, no one telling us who needed what. I looked at him. That's the boundary. His face changed. What? That's what I'm asking for. You want me out of my own family? I want you out of conversations that aren't yours. That's the same thing. No. I reached for the 3rd page, though I no longer needed it. If Mom wants something from me, Mom asks me. Mom looked at me. If Megan wants something from me, Megan asks me. Megan gave a small nod. If you personally need something, you can ask me. Dad's eyes narrowed. But you do not get to tell Megan I agreed to money I didn't agree to. You do not get to tell Mom what my no means. And you do not get to bring me requests on behalf of somebody who can speak to me herself. So now everything needs an appointment. No. A form. No. A spreadsheet. Despite myself, I almost laughed. No. It needs the actual person asking. Dad shook his head. This is divisive. It's direct. You've always been able to help. The sentence hit the oldest bruise. The one he had dressed up as praise for years. You're the one I don't have to worry about. You'll be okay. You can handle it. Something inside me finally separated ability from obligation. Being able to carry it doesn't make it mine. No one spoke. Dad stared at me, as though I had broken a rule he had never imagined needed to be stated. Maybe I had. He looked at the papers, then at me. I hope this is worth it. There was no apology, not even the weak one he had offered on the phone. For a second, grief moved through me so sharply that I nearly hated myself for still wanting it. One sentence. I was wrong. That was all the child in me had ever wanted from him, but wanting it had kept me waiting at too many tables. I stood. Dad's head lifted. We're not finished. I am. Sit down. The command reached me from 30 years away. A teenager coming home late. A college student questioning why Megan got the newer car. A daughter asking why another emergency somehow belonged to her. My body remembered before my mind did. Shoulders tightening. Breath shortening. The instinct to sit. Instead, I picked up my bag. Mom said my name. I looked at her. Not Dad. If you want to call me, call me. Her lips pressed together. Then she nodded once. Megan watched me. What am I supposed to do now? The question hurt, because it was so familiar. Usually, I would have answered before she finished asking. Make a list. Call this person. Sell that. I'll come tomorrow. I don't know, I said. Her face fell. That's yours to figure out, Dad muttered. Unbelievable. I turned toward the hallway. For the first time in my adult life, I left that house before everyone agreed I was allowed to. Daniel was parked half a block away. I had texted him from the entryway before dinner ended. Done. Can you come? He did not ask for details over text. When I opened the passenger door, he looked at my face. How did it go? I buckled the seatbelt. He didn't apologize. Daniel nodded slowly. Did you say what you needed to say? Yes. Okay. That's it? What else do you need? The question loosened something in my chest. Drive. He pulled away from the curb. We had barely reached the end of the block when his phone chimed through the car speakers. He glanced at the dashboard. Your dad. My stomach tightened. What did he send? Daniel waited until the light turned red, then opened the preview. His mouth flattened. What? He handed me the phone. You need to talk sense into your wife. She is destroying her relationship with her family over money. For several seconds, the absurdity was almost impressive. I had just told Dad he could not use one person to control another conversation. Before I had even left the neighborhood, he had tried to route himself through my husband. Daniel took the phone back. Do you want me to answer? No. Block him? The old instinct whispered that blocking Dad from Daniel's phone was dramatic. Rude. Unnecessary. Then I pictured every message that would follow. Tell Claire. Make her understand. You know how she gets. Another doorway. Please. Daniel blocked the number and set his phone down. Nothing exploded. The car kept moving. Streetlights passed across the windshield. By the time we reached home, Mom had texted me. Not, your father says. Not Dad wants you to know. Just, can I call you tomorrow? I answered. Yes. A minute later, another message arrived. Megan, I'm closing the store. My chest tightened. Then the next line appeared. I don't know what comes next. My thumbs moved automatically. I can help you make a plan. The words sat there. 4 seconds. 5. I deleted them. Then typed. Then figure out the next thing that's yours. If you want to talk to me as your sister, call me. I stared at it. Too hard. I erased the first sentence and tried again. You'll have to decide your next step. I'm willing to talk, but I won't manage it or fund it for you. Send. That version felt less satisfying. Which was probably why it was better. The phone buzzed again before I could put it down. This time the message was in the group Dad had created for the dinner. Claire has turned everyone against me. My fingers flew to the keyboard. No, Dad. What happened tonight was... I stopped. The cursor blinked. There were so many things I could explain. Nobody had turned Mom against him. Megan had corrected her own facts. His messages were his messages. His choices were his choices. I could write 6 paragraphs. 12. I could attach the chronology. I could make the most airtight case of my life. And tomorrow he could still tell somebody I was angry. Controlling. Influenced by Daniel. Obsessed with money. A spreadsheet could prove what happened. It could not force him to become the father I wanted. My thumb held the backspace key. The words disappeared. Daniel set 2 glasses of water on the kitchen counter. You answering? No. For once, leaving his version unanswered did not feel like surrender. Dad could tell any story he wanted. What he could no longer do was make his story my instruction. The first month without the automatic transfer felt wrong. Not good. Not freeing. Wrong. On the Monday morning when the payment would normally have left my checking account, I opened my banking app before I got out of bed. The money was still there. For years, that amount had disappeared so predictably I barely registered it. I had treated it like a utility bill. Mortgage, insurance, electricity, parents. Now the line was gone. Daniel was still asleep beside me. I stared at the balance and waited for the other shoe to drop. A furnace, a prescription, a car, a phone call beginning with, "We hate to ask, but..." Nothing happened. By breakfast, the money was still mine. That somehow made me nervous enough to open the budgeting app twice. Daniel poured coffee into my mug. You've checked that account 3 times. Twice. Once while I was brushing my teeth. That barely counts. He sat across from me. What are you worried about? I looked at the screen. That something will happen because I didn't send it. Something might happen. That's not helpful. It's true. I stared at him. He took a sip of coffee. But something happening doesn't automatically make it yours to fix. The sentence landed quietly. That was the problem with boundaries once the dramatic moment passed. No one applauded when you maintained them on an ordinary Monday. You just had to live with the space where the old habit used to be. What should we do with it? Daniel asked. With what? The money. My first impulse was automatic. Leave it there. Just in case. The phrase rose so fast I almost said it aloud. Just in case Mom needed something. Just in case Dad had a real emergency. Just in case Megan hit some impossible deadline. Just in case I had been too harsh and needed to repair what I had broken. I opened our budget. There was already a category labeled emergency savings. Another for home repairs. Another for travel. Near the bottom sat the line I had created years earlier. Family buffer. I stared at the words. Daniel noticed. You want to keep it? No. My fingers moved over the keyboard. I deleted the label. For a second, the empty field looked strangely exposed. Then I typed, our future. The words looked embarrassingly sentimental in a budgeting app. I left them there anyway. We divided the amount between replacing the back porch steps in the spring and adding to our emergency savings. Nothing glamorous. No luxury trip. No dramatic purchase designed to prove I had won. Just wood, savings, and money, no longer waiting for someone else's crisis. My phone rang before I finished my coffee. Mom. I looked at Daniel. He kept eating. No question. No warning. I answered. Hi, Mom. Hi. Her voice sounded hesitant. I waited. I wanted to ask what you're doing for Thanksgiving. It took me a moment to understand the sentence. Not because Thanksgiving was complicated. Because she had called me directly about something ordinary. No plans yet. Well, I was thinking maybe we could do lunch instead of dinner this year. Why? Because I thought it might be easier. That old word. Easier. Easier for who? Mom Sehild. Claire. I'm asking. For everyone. I nearly pushed harder. Then stopped. Not every vague sentence needed cross-examination. Maybe, I said. Send me the time when you decide. All right. She hesitated. Then, exactly as I expected, she added. Your father thinks you're punishing him. There it was. The old relay system trying to rebuild itself through the easiest available wire. I put my coffee down. If Dad wants to tell me something about Dad, he can call me. He doesn't know how to talk to you anymore. That's something he can figure out. You know how stubborn he is. And I'm not discussing him through you. Mom went quiet. The pause stretched. You make everything so formal now. I'm trying to make it direct. I liked it better when people just talked. We didn't just talk, Mom. We talked through Dad. She did not answer. For a few seconds, I thought the call was about to end badly. Then she said, I bought those little apples you like. What little apples? The Honeycrisps from the farm stand. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. They are normal-sized apples. They're smaller than the grocery store ones. We argued mildly about apples for another 3 minutes. No money. No rescue. No message I was expected to carry back to Dad. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand. The call had not repaired anything. Mom had not apologized for years of silence. She had not suddenly become brave. But she had called me herself. And then she had stayed on the phone after I refused to discuss Dad. That counted. 2 months later, Megan texted me a photograph of an empty retail space. The walls behind the checkout counter had been stripped bare. The racks were gone. So was the brass sign with the boutique name that Dad had helped her order when she opened. Closed today. That was all she wrote. I stared at the picture longer than I expected. There had been a time when I would have driven straight over. Helped box inventory. Called buyers. Made spreadsheets. Found storage. Fed everyone. Organized whatever came next before Megan had time to feel the loss. Instead, I typed, I'm sorry. I know that mattered to you. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then returned. It did. A week later, she asked me to lunch. She looked different when she walked into the restaurant. Not physically. There was just less performance around her. No boutique-branded tote. No phone propped beside her plate to photograph lunch. She sat down and said, "I got a job." That was fast. "I've been interviewing." "Doing what?" "Showroom operations for a furniture company." "That sounds like something you'd be good at." She shrugged. "Salary, benefits, normal hours." The word normal carried more grief than relief. I let it. Her debt had not vanished with the store. She told me she had sold remaining inventory at a steep discount and was working through repayment arrangements. The supplier claims still existed. So did other balances. None of it sounded easy. None of it sounded like the end of her life. "I made the first payment from my paycheck," she said. "Good." She looked at me as if she had expected more. "Just good? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." "Then good is what I have." Megan picked at the edge of her napkin. Dad offered to keep helping. I stopped lifting my water glass. "How?" "He said he could cover some payments if I stopped feeding you information and quit taking your side." Heat rose behind my ribs. "What did you say?" "No." The answer was plain. Not triumphant. "I don't want another person's name attached to whatever he gives me." I studied her face. That was not an apology either. It was something more useful. A changed decision. "He thinks you ruined everything," she added. "He's allowed to think that." Megan gave me a tired smile. "That sounds exhausting." "What?" "Not correcting him. It was worse correcting him." She looked down. "I'm angry at him." "That makes sense." "I'm angry at myself too." I said nothing. She continued. "I liked believing you were fine with it." The sentence caught me. "At first I really thought you knew. Later." She rubbed her thumb against the condensation on her glass. "There were times I probably should have asked. I didn't because if Dad said you were okay with it, then I didn't have to find out whether you weren't." There it was. No absolution. No rewriting herself into another victim. Just responsibility arriving late. "I don't know what you want me to do with that," I said. "Nothing." "That's probably good." She nodded. We finished lunch talking about her new job, not the old debt. Before we left, Megan said, "Can we have one rule?" "What?" "If I need something from you, I ask you." "That's already my rule." "Then if you need something from me, you ask me too." That surprised me. Okay. We did not hug in the parking lot. We did not become close overnight. But 3 months after my wedding, my sister and I had our first relationship that did not require Dad standing between us. Robert called me twice during that period. The first time, I answered. He asked whether I was happy now. With what? With Megan closing the store. No. You got what you wanted. I never wanted her store to fail. You refused to save it. Those were two different statements. For once, I did not spend 15 minutes explaining the difference. Dad, if you called to tell me how you feel about me, you can do that. If you called to tell me what I owe Megan, I'm ending the call. He laughed bitterly. You talk like a policy manual. Which is it? The line went quiet. Then he said, Your aunt thinks you've gone too far. Then Aunt Carol can tell me. He hung up. 3 days later, Aunt Carol did. She called on a Sunday afternoon and spent several minutes circling the point before saying, Your father feels like you turned your mother and sister against him. I was folding laundry. A year earlier, I would have put the basket down and prepared a defense. Instead, I matched 2 socks. I didn't ask either of them to stop talking to him. He says you put them in a group conversation and embarrassed him with private messages. We compared statements he had made about my money. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Carol Sahil. You know, he's still your father. Yes. He loves you. Maybe he does. The answer made her quiet. I folded another shirt. You don't sound convinced. I'm convinced that love doesn't give him permission to promise my money. She tried another angle. He says you've always been the successful one, and Megan needed more. That's true. So, can't you understand why he did it? I understand the argument. I don't accept the conclusion. There was nowhere for the conversation to go after that. Carol stayed on Dad's side. So did 2 other relatives. As far as I could tell from Thanksgiving invitations I stopped receiving and comments Mom carefully avoided discussing. That hurt. I had imagined that evidence would create consensus. Facts had changed the relationships closest to the system. They did not convert everyone watching from outside it. For a while, that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then one evening, about 6 months after the wedding, I found myself telling Daniel about an aunt who had not returned my Christmas message. He was sanding one of the new porch steps. I keep thinking if I sent her the screenshots, she'd understand. Would that make your life better? I don't know. He kept sanding. The rasp of paper against wood filled the space between us. Finally, I sat on the top step. The hardest part wasn't the money. I know. It wasn't even the cake. Daniel put the sanding block down. For years, I thought eventually Dad would say, "You've done enough." My throat tightened around the words. Not thank you. Not even I'm proud of you. Just, enough. Daniel sat beside me. I kept thinking if I handled one more emergency, paid one more thing, made one more problem easier, eventually he'd look at me and say, "Let me take care of you this time." The porch light cast a pale rectangle across the yard. "That may never happen," I said. Daniel did not say it would. He did not tell me he would replace what Dad had failed to give. He picked up the sanding block again and turned it in his hands. Then we build a life where enough actually means enough. I looked at the half-finished steps. Our money. Our Saturday. Our work. Nobody waiting inside with a crisis. Relief and grief sat beside each other without canceling anything. I think I can live with that, I said. By spring, the porch was finished. Mom called me sometimes. Not every week. Sometimes she still tried to tell me what Dad thought, and I stopped her. Sometimes she caught herself first. Megan sent occasional updates. Third payment cleared. New job is boring, but I sleep better. Sold the last storage unit of inventory. I did not ask for her repayment schedule. I did not monitor her. I did not praise her for doing what belonged to her. Dad remained mostly distant. Once, he sent me a birthday card signed only, "Love, Dad." No apology. No acknowledgement. I kept the card for 2 days, then put it in the drawer with other cards. Not displayed. Not destroyed. A year after the wedding, Daniel came home carrying a small white bakery box. I smelled vanilla before he opened it. My body reacted before my thoughts did. Shoulders tight. Jaw locked. For a second, I was back beneath ballroom lights with frosting against my eyelashes and my father's voice cutting through the room. Then Daniel opened the box. A 6-inch vanilla cake. Nothing dramatic. No writing on top. No joke about last year. Just cake. "You okay?" he asked. Yes. This time, the answer was true. We ate dinner at our kitchen table. No relatives. No speeches. No one asking for money. Afterward, Daniel carried the cake over and set down 2 plates. My phone lit up beside me. Megan. Payment cleared today. Still no help needed. I smiled before I could stop myself. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Proud of you. Too much. I deleted it. Good. Then I added. Hope work was okay today. Her reply came almost immediately. Boring. Beautifully boring. I laughed. Then, placed the phone face down. Daniel handed me the knife. The blade pressed through the soft frosting. Vanilla filled the kitchen again. The memory was still there. Maybe it always would be. But memory was not instruction. I cut one slice. Not the smallest. Not the neatest. Just the one I wanted. Then, I placed it on my own plate. Nobody reached for it. Nobody told me who needed it more. Nobody asked what I could afford to give away. And for the first time, being loved did not require me to pick up the bill.